Now, the so in trying to imagine how could this possibly be, I was trying to understand the world, understanding people, understanding things, or just looking at it. I don't know if I'd call it a dream more than an understanding, but at the time I felt I was understanding or seeing things in new light. So I was very thrilled in my imagination, just wide awake about seeing this. There was no question of being asleep. I was just so wide awake. But as I'm following the patterns of the ideas or the thoughts or the images, I started to see, oh, it's like millions of poor people and people having nothing, making, it was like, I thought they had no materials to try and cause war, get anywhere, and what would happen if they just were making, that they'd made these huge kites made of human skin or stuff, were flying on these kites along, oh, wind currents or something, and try and land, just coming to America and trying to land in America. And if millions of people just landed here, there wouldn't need to be any other war. It would just change the power of everything. Well, it's interesting in that this vision was a few years before. I'm just coming back thinking about it, but this vision was a few years before China got into the United Nations and got accepted as being part of the United Nations by Trudeau's politics, and it changed the balance of power in the world. So maybe it was connected to that. Anyways, I had seen this process. I started to think, where are people going? They're going to go to fly down through India, fly over and go through Europe, and how this imaginary world war would happen. And it didn't seem imaginary, but I was thinking this was real. Feeling it was real is a better way of seeing it. Then I'm sitting in the room, I'm finally, like, I guess you'd call it back in my body, but I'm almost expecting soldiers to kick down the door of the ashram. It's almost like I'm sitting there and I'm in such a state of shock and fear. I'm back in my body, I'm in shock, but I'm all alone. It's a black room, and I'm expecting soldiers to kick down the door. So it's an interesting puzzle, because what's reality? What's not? What I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing. And it was like many layers of things were going on at the time. Now, from here, it's a little stranger, because I think my body was functioning in the room automatically without me having to be conscious about it. So I think I was able to walk around the room and just carry on functions for a few days or for a while without really being conscious of it, while I'm still in the light of this vision, anticipating things. So up to this time, I'd been really quiet in the room, and then I sent a little note out of this room. It was black, but I had paper, and if I ever needed anything, I never used it. So I took this little piece of pencil and a little notepad, and I just put a note on. Send me some bigger piece of paper and some pencils or something. I wanted to try and draw down some of the designs or visions that I had, and I can't say wanted. I just was impelled, or felt it. I just was following the process of the vision and the idea to try and express it, manifest it. So I also, somewhere along here, I began to think about my mother and being in Montreal, and I began to think, oh geez, what's going to happen to her? So I wrote this letter. This is in the room, just sitting there, I'm just writing this letter, and to try and tell my mother, saying that this world war going to happen and she should get out of Montreal and move up to the mountains and get away from it. It was like, and I had this letter written. I was just ready to send it, put it, there's this double door in the room where they put things in and I take things out. So I was just ready to put it in this compartment to send it out, when it just dawned on me, she's not going to believe it. So I pulled it back in, and I didn't send it. But now, to me, that's probably it's hard to say what the beginning or end of the vision is. Because I could say that's the end of the vision in the black room. Well, I had many poetic visions and many ideas. My mind was going off like fireworks. It's as if every thought I had would go out, break up into 4 or 5 other thoughts, and each of those thoughts would break up into 4 or 5 more thoughts, and it would keep going like this, and I was able to follow all these thoughts at the same time. So while this vision went on, I don't think I lost consciousness or was able to sleep for about 40 days or 50 days. About 50 days probably. I would lie down, but my mind was still going off, and I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't lose the consciousness. So on one hand, we have this really weird, demented vision about what's happening in the world that maybe in some way was prophetic, but at the same time, too unreal. I'm thinking it's real and feeling it's real. But when I went to send this letter to my mom, I realized it wasn't real. She wouldn't believe it. Not that it wasn't real, that she wouldn't believe it, so I pulled it back in and destroyed it, I guess, or something. I must have. But at the same time, inside of all of this, there was a vision of the structure of the universe, of the cosmos, of the planets, of the spirits in life, of the textures of life that was so vividly real. So it's as if I had this bizarre dream, but interpenetrating it, or on another level at the same time, on a subtle level, there was a teaching, a cosmology, a knowledge, an understanding coming in. So it's kind of like I was born out of this room with new contrast between a sense of what the outer world was, however bizarre that might have been or might seem, and the silence or peace of where this came from. Still probably struggles in my life trying to integrate these two structures, the outer vision and the inner space that came from. It's interesting that the inner space that the vision came from is far more spacious and huge than this tiny universe we're in. So it's like when I fell into this mandala, or this space that became the space that the whole universe is in. But that's a small little thing compared to the space of where visions come from. So it's kind of like I came out of this room, and I'd spent longer time in this room than I spent in my mother, for that matter. So it really was like a second birth. But there was this new me, or this new sense of me coming out, that came, the part of me that was all this vision and all these things and all these thoughts and feelings came out. But at the same time, there was a part of me that's the not me that the vision came from, that came with me. So in one way, the vision and the dream and coming out just seems like a dream, like it wasn't real, like this is too bizarre. And in another way, and this is still true, that the silence that the vision and everything came from is more real and more present than anything I could ever be. And in a way, and I felt this much more when I first came out of the room for the first 5 or 10 years, but I still could see, it's as if maybe I never came out of the room and I just imagined it. And I'm out here following my thoughts and my imaginations, or what I think is reality. And the reality is really just in that silence, in that understanding that's not just in the room, it's inside all of us, it's everywhere. But I often feel I haven't ever left the silence in that room, yet my consciousness or my ego or my identity is caught up in all sorts of storms and things in life anyways. That's probably about as good a conclusion as I could make to talk about the vision, although coming out of the vision and coming back from India, there's a lot of stories I could tell here, but I think I didn't even think, I came out and I was just overwhelmed by everything. I mean, my sensory perceptions was so altered by being alone and being in darkness and coming out and dealing with light, sound, that I saw golden auras around everybody, like about feet, ground area for a number of while. I saw silver ores, and it came to white ores, and just started to see some of these, but they were just whole colors. They weren't all mixed ores or anything like that. But it was I got left India, came back to Canada. And I was living in Montreal, pay off the debt of the plane fare for about 6-7 months, and then I left and traveled a bit, and I was back down in San Francisco and places. And it wasn't until someone did a horoscope for me in San Francisco, it was a couple of years later, that I realized how astrological my vision was. And from that point, I started studying astrology. Like, I couldn't go to sleep. I was just reading 20 books a day. I was up 20 hours a day. I was just obsessed. I couldn't get enough information. I was just absorbing any kind of information I get because it was confirming some of the visions. At this vision, I didn't have the technical skills or the language of astrology evolved to be able to use it. So really, much of the library, much of the classes, much of the things that I've been doing for the last 20, 30 years has been based on this vision of the planets, of the stars, of our relationship to it, where we come from. Life's still a mystery. But this is part of my mystery, is that I didn't even realize it was astrology, and I lit up again. It was just such a connected thing. I just kept studying and finding every author there was that I could possibly find in the world, read their works, studied it, and became so informed about it. And in the process of learning astrology, I began to develop a world sense, a sense of the time and experience in life. Really, I felt at the time that maybe it would allow me, through meeting people's experiences and knowing astrology, to really just understand what people go through in life, to be able to get some sense of what's happened to me, just on that simple level. Now, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and my ability to understand timings and potentials in the world, and crises and life and death and struggles and wars and things of these sorts, I can see them in a common sense sort of way on one level. But still, there's an inner understanding inside of this too that's always challenging the outer interpretation, also usually transcending the outer interpretation. But from this vision of astrology, and along the way in there too, although I didn't realize it at the time, a few years later when I designed a musical instrument and built the celestial harp, that the vision of the harp came from this time too. So really, it's like I went into these black rooms, went into these meditation rooms, chanted and meditated, had a vision, came out, lived in this vision, trying to make as much of it happen as I could. And if anything, it was teaching astrology and actually being able to express some of my understandings or experiences that way and learn through that, but also creating the musical instrument and following the vision through so that there was something concrete in life. So I remember when I finished building the instrument, I thought, gee, my work was finished. And then suddenly I had to put strings on it, learn about tuning, learn about string, and it was a whole nother puzzle and struggle coming on. But the actual source or place, where do thoughts come from? Where do imaginations come from? Where do visions or dreams come from that create things? And where does inspiration come from? That's the inspiration itself is a smaller thing compared to where they come from. Okay, so after this vision and coming out, I almost expected to be transported or sent right back right away. It wasn't that easy coming back, but I did come back. I had the vision. I got into astrology. I started exploring and building the musical instrument. It's almost was like when I built the instrument, it was kind of like the mountain in Close Encounters. I saw it, I had to build it, and it just made it seem crazy to anyone else. I didn't know if it would sound good or anything. I just had to build it and see it, and so it's just evolved like that. Now, some 27 years later, just a few years ago, I went back to India again, went back into the Black Room again. I called back and saw it to see. I hadn't really kept in touch, and I was asking if anybody was there, I phoned and they said, yeah, why don't, it's the 100th centenary of the Guru who died in 76, and said, why don't you come and visit? So I said, why not? Went back to the room and went back to met some of the people that were there when I first came out. Only spent 7 days in the room this time. I didn't have a lot of time, but even one day alone in silence, trying to maintain your chanting, your meditation is not as easy as one would think, because your mind, everything tells you why to go out. So when I went back into this room, there's one room in southern India, I started meditating, time's going on, and they had, while I had been away the 30 years, one person used the room once for a couple of weeks, or a month or something, and then it was never used again for meditating like this in 30 years. So what had happened is a temple nearby had broken or ended, and they took the idol of Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, from this, who is coincidentally the god of astrologers and of fortune, and they broke down the wall of the black room and pushed this idol, this whole idol, into the room. So it was maybe on a pedestal. It might have been 4 by 4, coming up to about 8 feet high, and inside of it was a little statue of Ganesh. But the whole thing was like probably, I don't know if it was marble or it was very heavy in any case. So they had to break down the wall to put it in there. The interesting thing is, so when I first went back to this room, it was like imposing. This god was sitting in this room that I'd spent all my time in. I'm just going to go meditate in this room. And they got, instead of just being an empty room that I walked around, there was the empty room, but one corner, one side of the room had this 4-foot indentation for this god and had been used as a temple. So I didn't mind it. I got used to the company and I sort of walking around the room. But after being there, I began to realize, as I'm sitting down beside it and meditating, that from where I was sitting and where I had the vision and where I imagined the lightning bolt hit the room and the wall broke apart and hit me, right where that lightning bolt hit the wall was where the wall was taken down to let this statue of Ganesh come into the black room and to be put in there. So to me that was very uncanny, that where my vision was, and then I left India for 30 years, and while I was away, the actual, almost like the birth of a god, like God Ganesh came and was put in that place without me having contrived anything. It just, there was a meaningful manifestation right at that very place. Physically, if I sat there and I physically sensed where the vision was, that would be where the wall was and where I was seeing things. Really, it was probably happening in another plane, but just from where I was sitting and where I was meditating, that was where it happened. So in coming back in that and seeing that there, as soon as I sat down the place, it just, this gong went off, waking me up to some of my initial visions and some of the sources of the visions, and realizing this process. So who knows what happens over time, or how gods are born, or how things like this happen, or what movements go on. It's a nice memory for me. It's a beautiful reflection on something. It's kind of a confirmation that I didn't contrive or anything. It's not perhaps as meaningful as just being aware of the silence or the wholeness or the hugeness of God or being. But in terms of my own separate identity and having had a vision and looked at the vision, it seemed to be just perfect. I don't like the word to use, the word epitaph for the vision, but it's like a perfect punctuation for that it happened. Even though, so other people would come in and see this God and worship this God as the temple, but to me it was much more intimate, overwhelming phenomena. But someone else, it still was a place of worship. So it's a place of worship in me, and out there too whenever I could get there. But it was just, I wouldn't call it coincidence. Some people might.